Your soulmate received a phone call and ended ties with everyone. They said you are my beloved child. Your soulmate received a phone call that lasted only a few minutes, but when it ended, something inside them had completely changed. They sat there staring at the dark screen, almost as if the voice on the other end had confirmed something they had been afraid to admit. Then came the part nobody around them expected. They began cutting ties. Not with one person. Not because of one argument. They stepped away from several people who had been influencing their choices, questioning their feelings, and quietly telling them what kind of future they should choose. But the strangest moment came when someone demanded an explanation. Your soulmate didn't defend themselves. They didn't argue. They simply said there was one person they could no longer pretend didn't matter. That person was you. Yet what they said about you immediately afterward left everyone silent. The phone call had apparently revealed something your soulmate had been missing for a long time. Someone on that call reminded them of a conversation from the past, a conversation where your name had come up when you weren't there to hear it. Your soulmate suddenly realized that certain people around them had been shaping the story of your connection without knowing what was actually happening inside their heart. They had listened to opinions, warnings, assumptions, and doubts until those voices became louder than their own feelings. But this call changed that. One detail was mentioned that nobody else could explain away, and your soulmate finally understood why they kept thinking about you even while trying to move forward. Don't skip, because this is where their decision became deeply personal. They weren't ending ties because someone ordered them to. They were doing it because they finally recognized what those relationships had been costing them, and they refused to let anyone make that choice for them again. Then someone close to your soulmate asked the question everyone else was thinking: why would you risk all of this for one person? There was a pause. A long one. Your soulmate could have avoided the question, but this time they didn't. They said you were not simply someone they cared about. You were the person who made them question every compromise they had been making with their own heart. They said being reminded of you felt different because you represented something they couldn't manufacture with anyone else, something honest, unfinished, and impossible to replace by simply choosing what looked easier. But they still hadn't revealed the most important part. Because during that phone call, your soulmate learned one specific truth connected to you, and that truth was the real reason they suddenly became willing to lose everyone else's approval. Stay till the end, because when they finally explained exactly what they now believe you are to them, even the person questioning them didn't know what to say next. What happened seconds later made the room feel completely different. Your soulmate finally explained that the phone call had forced them to confront something they had been avoiding for months. Every time they tried to imagine a future without you, they could picture the life, but they couldn't feel anything inside it. They could see the places, the routines, even the people others wanted them to choose, but something was always missing. Then the caller mentioned a private detail connected to an old conversation about you, something your soulmate thought nobody else had noticed. That was when everything clicked. The distance hadn't erased their feelings. Other people's opinions hadn't changed them. Time hadn't replaced you. And when someone standing nearby tried once more to convince them that walking away from everyone was too extreme, your soulmate answered with a sentence nobody expected. You don't understand what this person means to me. But they weren't finished. For the first time, your soulmate began revealing what had really been happening behind their silence. They admitted that people close to them had repeatedly encouraged them to choose what seemed practical instead of what felt real. Some told them to forget you. Others suggested they could find someone easier, someone who wouldn't bring so many complicated emotions to the surface. Your soulmate tried to listen. They genuinely tried. But every attempt to disconnect only made one truth more obvious: their feelings for you weren't disappearing. Instead, they were becoming clearer. The phone call simply gave them the courage to stop pretending otherwise. So when another person asked, "What makes them so different?" your soulmate didn't hesitate this time. They said you were the one person they could never reduce to a passing memory. Something about you had reached a place in them nobody else had touched. And then they revealed that the caller had asked them one question that changed the entire direction of the conversation. The question was painfully simple: if everyone else's opinion disappeared tonight, who would you choose? Your soulmate went completely quiet. No family expectations. No friends advising them. No fear of judgment. No pressure to make the safe decision. Just their own heart and one honest answer. Your name came to them immediately. That realization was why they began ending ties with anyone who refused to respect their decision. They weren't rejecting everyone forever, they were drawing a boundary against anyone determined to control what happened between you and them. But something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate's answer went deeper than simply saying they would choose you. When the caller asked them to describe exactly who you were in their life, your soulmate used a phrase they had never dared to say aloud before. And once those words left their mouth, even they seemed shocked by how certain they sounded, because what they called you revealed what they may be preparing to do next. The words came out before your soulmate could soften them or take them back. They said, "That person is the future I kept trying to convince myself I could live without." For a moment, nobody responded. Your soulmate had never spoken about you with that kind of certainty before, especially in front of people who had spent so much time questioning the connection. But saying it aloud changed something. Suddenly, they weren't talking about a memory anymore. They were talking about a decision. The caller then asked whether they were prepared to stand behind those words when the pressure returned, and your soulmate answered yes without hesitation. That answer mattered, because only minutes earlier they had still been afraid of disappointing everyone around them. Now they seemed more afraid of disappointing themselves by losing you. And that was when they reached for something they had kept hidden for longer than anyone realized. It wasn't another person's secret or some dramatic piece of evidence. It was something much more personal, a message connected to you that your soulmate had never been able to erase. They had returned to it during lonely nights, difficult decisions, and moments when they almost convinced themselves to move on. Every time they read it, one particular line stayed with them. Not because the words were extraordinary, but because of how understood they had felt when they first received them. Your soulmate admitted that nobody around them knew how deeply that moment had affected them. They had acted normal afterward. They had allowed people to believe they were becoming distant. But privately, they kept wondering whether walking away from you would become the one decision they regretted for years. Don't skip, because the phone call didn't merely bring those feelings back. It made your soulmate realize there might still be something they could do before the distance between you became permanent. Then the caller asked the question your soulmate had been avoiding most: if this person matters that much, why haven't you told them? Silence followed. Your soulmate looked down at the message they had saved and finally admitted the real obstacle wasn't uncertainty about you. It was fear. Fear that too much time had passed. Fear that you might no longer believe them. Fear that after allowing other voices to influence them, they had lost the right to return and speak honestly. But the caller said something that stayed with them: silence was also a choice, and eventually that choice could become irreversible. Your soulmate knew it was true. So they opened your conversation, began typing, stopped, erased everything, and started again. This time, however, they didn't close the screen. Because the first sentence they finally wrote wasn't an apology, and it wasn't a casual hello. It was a confession about why that phone call made them choose you over everyone else's approval, and what they typed next could change everything between you. Their fingers hovered over the screen, but this time they refused to erase the words. The message began with something unexpectedly vulnerable: I need you to know why I disappeared when I should have been honest. Your soulmate stared at that sentence for several seconds because it exposed the truth they had hidden even from themselves. They hadn't stepped back because their feelings became weaker. They stepped back because those feelings became strong enough to frighten them. People around them noticed the change and began filling that fear with doubts. What if you weren't serious? What if the connection was only temporary? What if choosing you meant disappointing people they had known for years? Your soulmate absorbed those questions until they stopped trusting their own instincts. But after today's phone call, they finally recognized the difference between genuine concern and someone else's fear controlling their future. And that realization led them to type a second sentence that was far more revealing. They wrote that you were the person they had compared everyone else to without ever meaning to. Conversations with other people felt different. Plans that should have excited them somehow felt incomplete. Even during moments when they appeared perfectly fine, a small part of them kept wondering what would have happened if they had simply chosen honesty with you from the beginning. That was why ending those unhealthy ties happened so suddenly. Your soulmate realized they couldn't reach toward you while still allowing other people to pull them backward. So boundaries were drawn. Certain conversations were ended. One person even accused them of throwing everything away for an uncertain connection. Your soulmate's response was calm: I'm not throwing my life away. I'm finally deciding whose life I'm living. But there was still one problem. The message to you remained unsent, because your soulmate knew sending it would require revealing the one truth they had protected most carefully. And then they typed it. Slowly. No dramatic promises. No attempt to make themselves look innocent. They admitted they had imagined contacting you countless times and stopped themselves every single time because they feared your answer. They feared discovering that while they were struggling to make a decision, you had already made yours. But today's call changed the question inside their mind. Instead of asking, "What if they reject me?" your soulmate began asking, "What if they were waiting for honesty from me this entire time?" That possibility was enough to make them continue writing. Stay till the end, because the message was almost ready now, and your soulmate had reached the sentence that could determine whether they actually sent it. They wrote your name, paused, and followed it with 5 words they had never allowed themselves to say directly before. But just as their finger moved toward send, another notification appeared on the screen, and when they saw who it came from, everything stopped. That notification came from one of the very people your soulmate had just decided to distance themselves from. The message was short, but its timing felt almost deliberate. Think carefully before you do something you can't undo. Your soulmate read it twice, and for a few seconds the old hesitation returned. This was exactly how they had been controlled before, not through commands, but through carefully placed doubt at the moment they were closest to choosing for themselves. Yet something was different now. Instead of closing your conversation, they looked again at the unfinished message meant for you. Then they looked at those 5 words they had finally written after your name: "You are still my choice." Seeing the sentence on the screen made their chest tighten, because there was no longer anywhere to hide from what it meant. They could either retreat into the same silence that had already cost them so much, or finally allow you to know the truth. But before sending anything, your soulmate did something unexpected. They called that person back. Not to argue. Not to ask permission. They simply wanted to make one boundary unmistakably clear. They said they appreciated every person who genuinely cared about them, but nobody would be allowed to decide their emotional future anymore. The person on the other end tried to interrupt, reminding your soulmate of everything that could go wrong with you. Your soulmate listened quietly and then asked one question: "And what if walking away from this person is what I regret?" There was no immediate answer. That silence told your soulmate more than another hour of advice ever could. For the first time, they realized nobody criticizing their feelings could actually promise them happiness afterward. The consequences of losing you would belong to your soulmate alone. And that realization brought them back to your message with a completely different kind of courage. They reread everything from beginning to end. The explanation. The confession. The admission that they had allowed fear and outside opinions to keep them quiet. Then they added one final line. "I don't expect you to forget what happened, but I need you to know what is true now." Their finger moved toward send again, and this time nobody interrupted. But your soulmate still paused, not because they doubted their feelings, but because they suddenly understood what sending this message would truly mean. Once you read it, there would be no pretending the connection had meant nothing. No hiding behind distance. No blaming other people. They would finally have to face whatever answer you gave them. And then something changed on the screen that made their heart race. Your conversation showed a sign they hadn't expected to see at that exact moment, and your soulmate immediately wondered whether you were already there, looking at the same conversation, perhaps thinking about them too. What they did in the next few seconds was the decision they had been avoiding all along. For those few seconds, your soulmate forgot about everyone else and watched the screen as though it might answer the question they were too afraid to ask. Whether you were actually about to reach out or whether the timing was pure coincidence didn't matter anymore. It awakened something decisive in them. They realized they had spent far too long waiting for perfect certainty before being honest with you, when perfect certainty had never existed. So they stopped editing the message. They stopped trying to make every sentence safe. And instead of sending the carefully polished version, they added one raw confession at the bottom: "I should have protected what I felt for you instead of protecting myself from it." Then they pressed send. No dramatic countdown. No second chance to erase it. The message was gone from their hands and suddenly sitting there, carrying everything they had been too frightened to tell you. The moment afterward was harder than they expected. Your soulmate put the phone down, picked it back up, and walked across the room because sitting still became impossible. But beneath the nervousness was something unfamiliar: relief. For once, they had acted according to their own feelings instead of waiting for someone else's approval. Then another call came in. It was connected to the people they had just cut off, and your soulmate knew exactly what the conversation would probably become. They answered anyway. Questions came quickly. Why were they doing this? Why choose you after so much time? Why risk changing relationships that had existed for years? Your soulmate didn't become angry. They simply repeated the truth they had finally accepted: because this person matters to me in a way I can't keep denying. Then they added something nobody had heard them say before. They explained that choosing you wasn't about abandoning everyone, it was about refusing to abandon themselves. But the biggest shift came after that call ended. Your soulmate looked back at the message they had sent you and noticed something that made every other thought disappear. The message was no longer sitting there untouched. Suddenly, the possibility they had feared became real: you could know everything now. You could know they had been thinking about you. You could know other people's opinions had influenced their silence. Most importantly, you could know exactly what they had called you. The person they still chose when every outside voice was removed. Don't skip, because your soulmate had prepared themselves for anger, silence, even rejection. What they had not prepared for was the possibility that your response might reveal you had been carrying your own unspoken truth all this time. And as they stared at the conversation waiting for whatever came next, something appeared that made them sit completely still, because it suggested this story had never been one-sided. The sign on the screen was small, but to your soulmate it felt enormous. For the first time since sending that confession, they realized you might actually be preparing to answer. Their heartbeat quickened as they watched, afraid to look away and equally afraid of what might appear. Suddenly, every decision from the last few hours came rushing back: the phone call, the boundaries they had drawn, the people they had confronted, and those 5 words they could no longer take back. You are still my choice. Yet something unexpected happened inside them. The fear began turning into clarity. Whatever your response might be, they were finally relieved that you knew the truth. They had spent too much time allowing silence to speak for them, and silence had told you a story that wasn't accurate. Now, at least, you knew their distance had never meant indifference. But then something appeared in the conversation that made them realize you might have understood more than they ever imagined. Your soulmate remembered one particular moment between you that suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. It had seemed ordinary at the time: a brief exchange, a pause, something you said before the distance grew wider. Back then, your soulmate had convinced themselves you were already letting go. Now they wondered whether you had actually been giving them one final opportunity to be honest. That thought hit hard. They began recognizing how many times fear had caused them to misunderstand you. Every time you became quiet, they assumed you were losing interest. Every time you protected your emotions, they interpreted it as distance. And while they were waiting for unmistakable proof that you cared, perhaps you had been waiting for exactly the same thing from them. That possibility changed everything, because the phone call hadn't simply pushed your soulmate toward you, it had exposed the misunderstanding that may have kept both of you apart. Then your soulmate noticed something.